Welcome, everybody. We're just letting people into the event. It's going to take about a minute for everyone to trickle in. And I want to introduce the host of the event, founder of Oncoscope, Anna Forsythe. Anna, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Take it away.
Well, thank you. Thank you all very much. And thank you for participating in the event. I am going to share my screen with you and show you a little bit of the information about Oncoscope and about JCA. I'm here to proudly introduce our network of experts that we've just formed and announced earlier this week. And we are the speakers at this event to show you our approach and our thinking about the JCA and the current HTA environment. I believe that none of these speakers need an introduction. You all probably know or studied the books or read the guidelines written by Neil as well as Andrew. And I am sure you've heard or you've met Stefan at one of these four meetings or have done projects with him. We kind of have been around for a few years, let's say, and I'm very proud to say that today, in addition to these speakers, we have a guest from Pharma, a corporate vice president in Boehringer Ingelheim, Arup. And Arup is going to be here in a moment and join us in this conversation. I think he is here. Um, we wanted to talk about the JCA, and I know we have limited time, and I don't want to waste everybody's time giving you general statements about what it is. I assume if you signed up for the webinar, you've heard about that and you are curious about it. So I'm not going to give you general information. We want to concentrate on the few topics specifically. We want to talk about PICO prediction or PICO mapping. And is there a tool that can help you do this much faster in a cost-effective way that gives you a comprehensive map of the PICOs? And I will take on that topic and I will talk a little bit about this and introducing and demoing the Oncoscope. And once we discuss that, we'll move to Neil to talk about comparative effectiveness and how do we conduct indirect treatment comparisons now in the times of JCA and multiple PICOs. Then we're going to switch to Andy to talk about modeling and how we take it beyond the JCA, and then Stefan to talk about the countries, and finally Arup to give us the pharma perspective. Um, I'm starting here to discuss a little bit the living evidence that you must need, you must have in order to be ready for the JCA. Because as you all know, the JCA timelines are extremely short, and no one can really prepare the full submission in the timeline between the submission is requested to the time you have to submit. So I am here to introduce the Oncoscope Enterprise, which is a product created specifically for pharma companies with HOR group in mind. And it is a living evidence library. It's the only product out there that exists right now that is based on a daily systematic literature review. And it is not a chatbot. It's not that AI conducts the review fully. No, a team of experienced researchers conducts that review every day. We do use AI to do the first screening and the first extraction. Everything is QC'd 100%. So at the end, you end up not only with the full SLR, but then we take the next step. Actually, the work just start where the resultant evidence is cross integrated with the current guidelines in the US, in Europe, with the FDA and EMA approvals and with the HTA reimbursement to understand fully what is the map of that universe, of that evidence that we need. We currently already launched, you may have seen some of the posts on LinkedIn, the current libraries, these daily updated literature review interlinked with the world of guidelines and reimbursements submissions. This is exist for breast cancer, non-small cell lung cancer, prostate, multiple myeloma was launched earlier this week, and we're actively finalizing bladder. There's already a list you could see on the right for the next year, but basically any cancer could be built approximately 6 weeks to 2 months. Yes, because it is a systematic literature review. It is not something you can run in 1 second. All the Congress abstracts are there. So as a matter of fact, I'm traveling to ASH following by San Antonio Breast. These are already all on the platform. I am here to just give you a very quick demo in the limited time that we have. I'm going to show you the breast cancer. So once you log in, you select the cancer, you come to the page one, which we call a treatment map. And there you just start clicking on, this is your PICO, but just the letter P, the populations on all your subpopulations, as well as the class of your comparator. So you could start selecting things here. And as you select, you could see that only the things are relevant still remaining here. Now, you do not at all have to click an order. You could go backwards. And once you create a complete treatment path, you see the color here changes because this map reflects everything that is approved in the guideline, as well as that things that are in development but had positive data. As you could see here, the color changed because this is not currently in the guideline, but in the guidelines, however, there is positive pivotal trial data. But what if you don't want to go in order? By the way, you could see the drug. What if you don't want to go in order? What if you just want to understand if you're in early planning, you're in the PICO planning? You want to understand what the class of drug or specific subpopulation it has. Now, if I click on ADCs, there are 98 studies with ADCs. I'm going to limit it to metastatic. There's 78. And let's look at all of them. Let's look at all of them. Because again, with this living evidence, you have a flexibility to see as little and as detailed as you need for this specific case, whether it is a quick search or whether it's a detailed search, because you are thinking of the JCA. After all, today is all about JCA. You see the second page, which is a study listing, looks exactly like PubMed. In difference to PubMed, these are organized by studies, not by publication. So in this case, I'm looking at this Destiny Breast 4, has multiple publications. You could quickly see all additional publications with the dates. Everything is linked. Every study is tagged. So we have the tags that show which guidelines this study, which means this specific population and the comparator is in, whether it is still investigation, whether it is failed, whether it is approved. In addition to this, you can organize this by relevance. You can order it to see what's the most recent. You can add custom fields. As I mentioned, we extract a lot of information. In this specific screen, the fields are limited to only the top line because this screen is a part of also a physician tool that we actually now have over 4,300 oncologists worldwide are using it already. So in here, we give just the top line data. And if you could see the quality of life, I just added, and here it is appeared here. You can also use additional filters. Let's say that you've missed ESMO this year and you wanted to know how many posters of ADC were there. There were 17. You see it quite quickly. What if you also could filter by subpopulation? I'm going to talk about this a little bit more in a moment. But think of your PICO by subset, by subpopulation. Think of all these sub-analysis you're going to need to conduct. You may want to know what were the subgroups that were analyzed, that were reported by these drugs that you've selected. You could see it right away. You know which ones, because this is dynamic. This is based on the 17 studies I selected. These are potential subgroups that were there based on your subpopulation. So if you just had a quick question and you wanted to remember this, your affiliate asked you, you wanted to remember this study, you select the study, you download the report, it immediately tells you that based on the systematic literature review, 17 studies were selected, you subset just one, and all the relevant variables that you selected will be shown here. All the reference links are still here. However, I completely understand that this is not the tool you all need to support your HTA submissions and the JCA. You need things on the table. You need databases so that Neil and his group can conduct indirect treatment comparisons, and Andy could do the models. So let's switch to the table view. It's just one button. And then all the same studies, the original 78, are now here. But now we're talking a table. And since we are in an HOR universe now, we're going to need a lot more columns. We're going to need a lot more variables. We need to be presented as the database so that we can download and then conduct this analysis. We have a lot more filters. We can now select only phase 3. Let's say you are close to that HTA submission and you want only to select the studies that are relevant to you. There's 25 left. What if I only want RCTs? There is 20 left. What if I want multiple subpopulation based on prior therapies? So this is very important, because when you are mapping your PICO, where do they come from? It comes from the main analysis of the studies, which you just have in front of you right now, let's say, and you would subset your population, but it also will come from different analysis and subgroups done by prior therapies. And how can you find out very quickly what are these subgroups? It will take you few seconds, less than a minute, because they are right here. You could see again subpopulations, which I talked about already. Now, the other source of PICO comes from different subpopulations, patients with specific patient characteristics, which may be effect modifiers or prognostic factors. Where do they come from? They come from here. We can see a complete map, that complete universe that will give you a full PICO mapping. You also, if you are beyond the JCA and you're doing a submission to a specific country, you want to know which ones are relevant to a specific country. Okay, and now we're beyond the JCA. Maybe you're submitting to NICE. You need the things that are only relevant to NICE. You can very quickly select the guideline, or you want all of them, you add it as a column later on. But now that you have it all, you could just simply download it to the Excel. And now you have the table that you want. The protocols have been published in Prospero, so all of them are public. Now you can all look for the search string, for all of the protocol criteria. You could download a custom Word report as well that is ready for you instantly. Okay, and if you want to search for a study, you could just type here Destiny, for example, and then you say search, and you will see the 10 studies that are. This is for your targeted quickie searches that you may need. I am going to finish here with my time, and wanted to bring Neil and talk to him about the next step. So once you have that universe of PICOs, and there's quite a bit of them, uh, there may be 200, okay? The question I wanted to ask you, Neil, is, so should we now attempt to conduct an ITC for every single PICO we found and we mapped and we possibly could compare?
I would be very cautious in doing that personally. I think the starting point is to work out where you or the companies, the HTDs, feel the products should be used, in which populations, in which subpopulations, and so on. and then to identify what they think are the appropriate comparators. These, of course, may vary from country to country, but I think the starting point has to be to have a very clear view of where you think your product should be used. Of course, part of that consideration is to look at the evidence. There may be populations, patient groups you aspire to see your product used in, but the evidence may not be so strong. So I think that evaluation needs to go alongside a careful consideration of the evidence and what analyses you may be able to conduct to support that evidence. And that's something where a tool like Oncoscope could be incredibly valuable, I think.
Thank you. So how do I select that magic population? You've mentioned several things, right? You've mentioned where you think your product would be. Any other advice you could give beyond that?
Again, first, I think you look at the guidelines, you see what's already being used in the area your product's going to be launched into. You speak to clinicians, of course, and speak to clinicians from different countries and also different practices. Different clinicians in different parts of the country may have different practice. So try and understand the landscape. I would also speak to patients and understand what patients want and what they're looking for, and then see where the evidence fits in and where your product potentially fits in.
Great. And now that we selected the PICO that we wanted, that we go into support, how do we select the method that we use in the ITC? Because, every one of us who went to eSport recently, there's so many sessions on different indirect treatment comparison methods, and some of them quite complex. I can't even pronounce some of them. And what I see is there were quite a few posters that utilize different methods on the same comparator. So now considering that even if we try to limit, we're still talking, 10 pico, 15 pico. Now, do we try every method and see which one sticks, or is there a better way?
Again, I think in the same way, I think it's important to have a principled stance and say, this, I think, is the placement of the product. This is the appropriate PICO. We should be clear what we think are the most appropriate methods and put those forward first. Again, if we conduct a whole bunch of different analyses, we'll inevitably end up with a bunch of whole different estimates. And of course, if you conduct an analysis, you kind of own it. So again, I think the key is to be very focused on what you do and what you think is the most appropriate analysis. How we determine that. So first thing we look at is the network of evidence, what studies we have, what the connections are, where the trials make a linked network. We then look at the differences between the trials in the patient characteristics, in the methodologies used within the trial, in how treatments were given and how endpoints were measured. We then, and I think this is really important, and again, where I was really excited to see this within Oncoscope, we need to try and understand which variables, which characteristics might be treatment effect modifiers and which might be prognostic. This is, I think, absolutely key. Then based on those three kind of factors, we can start to think about the methodology, whether we've got a connected network and whether we can do some kind of network meta-analysis based on the comparison of relative treatment effects, or whether we have an unconnected network and we're going to have to do some kind of unanchored indirect comparison. What we can work out with is a rough hierarchy of the kind of reliability or acceptability of those methods. But by having that mapping of the network of trial evidence, an understanding of the differences between the trials, and crucially, an understanding of what might be predictive and what might be prognostic, we can then come up with what we think is the best analytic strategy.
So if I understood you correctly, and I just want to confirm, the methods are not truly interchangeable. So it is not, we use MAIC and we also try STC and we present both. Or are there cases when, is there a preferred method by a payer? Because I hear also, oh, well, NICE likes this one. Or is there interchangeability between methods, or is there really truly one method that should be most suitable in each specific case?
I think you raised a really interesting point there, which is kind of knowing your audience. And it's true that different HTA authorities or bodies may have preferences for certain methodologies, and CADF have expressed certain preferences recently, and different familiarity with those methodologies. However, they're certainly not all interchangeable. And we know that because they potentially give us different answers. So again, the problem is we conduct a set of different methodologies which give different answers. A, that creates uncertainty, and B, it creates the option for a payer to choose maybe the most pessimistic analysis. So I think we need to be clearly principled on what we think is the right analyses. And if it's something that a payer is not familiar with, we have to try and make it as accessible and well explained as possible. But
Okay.
we also need to be pragmatic and realize that some payers may prefer certain methodologies. So there is an issue of knowing your HTA authority as well, I think.
Okay, so basically at the end, if I may say, it doesn't have to be crazy expensive with us conducting 200 analysis and utilizing every single method. If we are being strategic and selective about it, I guess we could limit the time and effort and the budget that would be required if we know what we're doing, right? But then the key is how do we know what we're doing and how do we find those experts, right?
Yes, even out with the cost of resource and budget, also the time it takes to interpret the mass of analysis you can possibly get. It doesn't help you to present a massive analysis to a payer. Maybe it's confusing, it doesn't provide a clear message, and so on. But I think the keys are to have very good analysis, a very good landscaping of the data, and have experience and both the methodology and the assessment landscape.
Great. Um, Thank you for that. I am going to move along and switch with questions to Andy. I know we are moving a bit beyond JCA specifically because JCA is not looking to review or conduct uh, cost effectiveness analysis or analysis beyond. We are still now country by country in that world. But considering even with all the tricks of the trade that Neil talked about, we're still going to end up with multiple populations, multiple analysis, so multiple scenarios. How do we deal with that in thinking of a global model? So if you are in global HOR organization and now you need to create a model and it has a lot of scenarios, more than 20 different scenarios. What is the key to creating that model without making it overly huge and being able to adjust it quickly to the country submissions?
Thanks, Anna. I think the key here is to just be very clear about what it is that you're modeling. I don't think the model can or should change across different jurisdictions. How we think the model works, I think, is something that should remain constant. And so when you're faced with these many different PICOs potentially, it's actually a case of reparameterizing your model. It's not a case of developing bespoke models for different jurisdictions. Of course, those models need to be adapted. One of the exciting things about, well, the exciting thing about JCA itself is that it's designed to reduce the redundancy. Now, I know everyone's a little bit concerned that maybe that's not what's going to happen with JCA, but I think the jury's still out on that. I think there's a very clear case that it could reduce redundancy, and I think one of the exciting things about the living evidence base that you're developing with Oncoscope is the ability to interface with JCA in a way that sort of supports JCA's mission of removing redundancy, But also, although we know the health economic analysis is outside of JCA, I think for me, the exciting thing, listening to what, how you can deliver living evidence and how Neil can then feed that into a indirect treatment comparison network meta-analysis potentially makes me think that actually we can streamline the bits that are outside of JCA as well, like the developing of the economic model. In many, as we know, in many oncology applications, we deal with a very simple three-state model. That's a sort of almost a ubiquitous model now of pre-progression, post-progression, death. Within that framework, it's relatively straightforward to take the sorts of live evidence that's being produced and turn that into effectively a live model, which can be updated very quickly, can be adapted for different jurisdictions very quickly as well.
Uh, so you've just mentioned something very interesting because I see a lot of very complicated models. I mean, I worked in pharma and we always have a global model and that tends to be quite complicated because we thinking of global model equals sometimes to nice model. And then still our UK colleagues often complain that it is not complicated enough, okay, or it's not detailed enough, or it's not nice ready enough. And then when we go to other countries, we are stuck with this model that no one else can understand. Could you talk a little bit more about this tendency to create complex methods and where you do need more complicated methods and
Yeah.
where maybe you don't?
Sure, happy to. I mean, it's something I've previously called the NICE effect. NICE has been going for 25 years and very successfully in many ways. I mean, it survived many changes of government. It's still operating in broadly the same way that it was operating when it was set up. There have been some changes, of course, over the years, but nothing fundamental. I think one of the consequences of having a very clear framework for reimbursement in the UK that's been constant over 25 years is that there's a small industry been developed around supporting NICE submissions. And I think it's the incentives are all aligned to produce more complex models. I think in many ways you have to have quite a lot of confidence to provide a simple model. Now, I want to distinguish between simple models structurally from sophisticated analyses because I think they're two different things. What I see is the opportunity here for relatively simple models with nuanced and sophisticated analyses coming out of a living evidence base that means that we can quickly, as I say, quickly update those relatively simple model structures with live parameters in a way that would be acceptable to NICE, but also acceptable to other jurisdictions. I strongly believe that one of the downsides of a complex modeling process, people think that modeling is about representing the real world more and more accurately. It's certainly not the case that we want inaccurate models, but I'm fond of the expression that all models are wrong, originally attributed to George Box and statistical modeling, but I think equally applies to the sorts of models that we build. The aim is not to get a correct model. You'll never achieve that. Your aim is to get something that is simple enough without being simplistic, and that's the real art of modeling, in a sense. The other bit that meshes with is you need a strong narrative that runs through a submission. If I worry when I see very complex models that we lose the story. People see the complex model, they don't understand it, they don't trust it. A simple model which connects the evidence in the right way to give HTA agencies what they need, I think is the ultimate goal.
Thank you. No, this is very helpful. I'm going to move to Stefan. Oh, Stefan, sorry.
Yeah, sure, no worries.
Keep calling you the French way. So you've been talking a lot about AI. I see your podcast, and there's a lot there about the AI. And many of us are excited about the AI. You know, I could say, hey, yay, I am trying very, very hard to use more and more of it, but also aware that there are challenges that come with that, and we do work in a very regulated environment at the end. So tell us, where can we use AI in this very complex JCA process, as well as then we turn it to the individual country submissions? Are there just simple cases where this is where the AI is currently available, can be used, has been validated, and then there's the futuristic, you know, the robot will do everything for us. Okay, so talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, no, absolutely happy to do so. So I think the futuristic one is probably an interesting one, just because you just said, right? Maybe the industry robot might just submit, and that the submission is being reviewed by the robotic or by the payer robotic as well, right? So I mean,
Yes.
then we have a lot of time to speak about different other things, but leave that probably aside, right? I mean, when you just ask where AI can be utilized and can already now be utilized, I guess the key thing is probably more how to effectively use it already now, right? I mean, you just mentioned before, and systematic search, and a couple of other things. I would even say, I think Neil, you just mentioned as well, the point, and I fully agree with that. Whenever you try to understand the pathway, you try to understand the reality in the different markets, you need to speak to the physicians, and maybe as well to patient organizations. Of course, we as well need to have a critical look with whom we speak, right? I mean, I've as well spent quite a lot of time as well in the industry, tend to as well have a bias in there already, right? Meaning we just speak to the people we know, and maybe ideally as well, the people who might like us and our kind of product, right? Which is maybe not always the best thing to do. So meaning, having said that, I think what would be a good thing, we have now as well just done that in the last couple of months, for example, utilizing AI and different AI agents to screen basically the kind of landscape around which kind of physicians in also the different kind of types are available, who has published a lot, who has published where internationally, guidelines, etc., to really identify the best, in quotes, persons to really speak to. That's I think really something which is already fundamental, I would guess, across the different kind of areas we would be speaking about for JCA, because ultimately, and I like what Neil as well just said, if you conduct the analysis, you own it. And I think this is really key. Also strategically, you need to think what you want to submit. We have always done that on national level. And I'm coming to the second part of the AI piece, which is probably the dossier. But even within the dossier, we do not just simply write it, right? We don't just take the data and the analysis and the clinical trials and the model and just write it down, right? There has always been an idea what to tell, what should be the story, where's the benefit of it. And I think that is always, and also an even more complex nowadays with JCA, because we start top level with maybe a kind of roof, which is ideally for all of Europe, right? And I think this is really, I think, the important consideration already to think about. AI could already be used early on to help you defining the strategy, maybe just a piece of it. Because I think a lot is, of course, as well, and again, agree with, I think, whatever I has said beforehand, the experience is at least as important as maybe the tools we're using. So another tool which is already as well available, and we have as well spoken about that before, Anna, is AI dossiers, right? AI supported written dossiers. Why is that maybe important? Because time, I think, is a real issue, I think, within the whole kind of JCA process. I think the JCA process is really, let's say, planned, probably more a bit of theoretically planned, that it's being submitted in a very short time frame. I think it's not only like the kind of issues, for example, when the EMA label might change last minute, which sometimes can happen, right? It's a part of a negotiation. If you submit your data and then you speak about the kind of label text indication, hence indication might even have, of course, an impact on your JCA dossier. And just after the change, you have only a limited, very few number of days time to organize. That's one, let's say, specific piece. But even beforehand, it's very complex. And thereafter, of course, the industry as well wants to submit as soon as possible, normally, the dossier as well then to the national agencies, because they as well need time to review, right? Maybe Germany is the exception because you can directly launch it, you commercialize, you can already earn money as an industry, right? Other countries basically need the time to review, to negotiate, and just thereafter, you could basically then submit. Meaning you should really minimize now really the time to develop and write those dossiers for the different national authorities, linked as well strategically again to the JCA dossier, meaning all of that part could and should also as well be supported by the AI from my perspective.
Thank you. I have another question for you. So considering what is happening with the JCA, meaning that we have to prepare upfront. We used to have a launch sequence. I remember working in the value and access at Novartis with Arup. We're not going to go how long ago that was, but launch sequence was a big topic, and I had to learn about first wave countries and second wave countries. And JCA is kind of interfering with this established process. So how do you see this developing in the future? Is our launch sequence going to be changing? And how can we, because we don't have resources, okay, to just start launching in Greece and Germany at the same time, okay? Just taking these two countries, we can't even do that. So talk a little bit about that.
I mean, of course, that's probably more kind of scenario discussion, right? Because nobody really knows at this point in time. But I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, it's probably a couple of factors which let's say, go in that kind of question. I think the most important one is, of course, whenever the JCA dossier is available, all of that information is publicly available, meaning every single payer and HTA organization can basically have a look on that, which again brings it back to the strategic bit. We had discussions as well a couple of weeks, a month ago, where some companies, rather mid-sized to small companies, have as well just, but you know, the JCA office have asked us those tons of questions, right? We need to answer all of those, which is wrong, right? I mean, I think that's quite clear. But having said that, whatever you submit, you could of course still decide as a company to not launch, meaning submit your dossier in the various countries at the same time, right? Meaning, yes, of course, you maybe still start with Germany because, you know, you can commercialize it directly, you can sell already directly. Maybe even the price is most of the time as well a bit higher than in other countries, right? But then the question is still, let's say, who else would follow? That depends still a bit, right? But ultimately, you could still say, just imagine it's not the price. Imagine it's just a resource issue because you're a mid-sized company. And you might just say, look, I mean, I can only afford basically, let's say 4 countries, maybe 5 countries. You will not go with the usual suspect, but maybe you go with, I don't know, Netherlands, Germany, whatever, Denmark, and choose 2 others, right? The question is rather for me, how those payers would then react, right? Because ultimately, I could as well just say, you know what? You get a deadline. You have to submit by whenever, because otherwise I will just simply take the JCA results and it will initiate and start the kind of process, which is not so much the kind of case beforehand, right? Because of course you could have gone back and checked the literature and all that kind of stuff, but it was just literature. It was not original data. It was not further analysis, or it was a big effort. I think this effort is probably now minimized in a way, meaning from my perspective, I think the strategic move has as well now gone a bit rather towards, or let's say in favor of payers and HTA organizations. If that will be the real effect, I don't know, right? It's just a scenario what you can just made up, which is again bringing me back to the key question: what do you want to include in the JCA dossier that you are still in the driving seat from an industry perspective? And of course, HTA organizations, payers might as well ask for further data depending on the countries, which I think is a fair point. But then you can still submit it only for those individual countries. So I think this is the key question probably for me.
Thank you. Thank you. And I want to bring it to Arup now to tell us from the pharma perspective. So with the amount of work that we see, how early should we start?
No, great question. First of all, it's very nice to see that you've got a phenomenal, I would say, tool, which actually, when I look at it from what you presented, shows both sides of the pond. Congratulations to you and your stellar team. Uh, Disclaimer, I do work for Boehringer, but at this stage, I will just give you my perspective as a standalone. I've had the pleasure of working with you in Novartis, having worked in different divisions from medical affairs, sales, marketing to here. To be honest, I see this as a good change. It gives teeth to the folks in market access, HOR, bringing together strategic work with our statisticians, with our regulators and medical affairs folks. So I see this to be a benefit. I do not see this as a challenge because it also holds member states of Europe to acknowledge what they need to do right. It gives them an opportunity to decide what JCA thinks is the right thing to do, both the assessors and the co-assessors. You have countries which take forever to launch, and you're holding them responsible. But it also gives teams a chance to engage and negotiate with country teams to elevate their capabilities and capacity. I will stop at that if that helps.
Thank you. One further question, taking it a bit beyond the JCA. JCA is not the only thing that is happening right now in the global world of reimbursement. We have MFN, and we've just heard the announcement of the US UK negotiating. So US is the first ever case where US is all of a sudden first is considering other country pricing, but not only does it consider like in the MFN, but now it's influencing how the other countries are priced and reimbursed. So considering these recent developments, what are the important takeaways now for the HOR teams? Where do they have to change the way they are working now? What are the important things they need to do?
It's great being in access because it's never a dull day. MFN has been helpful. It's got the muscle and the teeth. The engagements with UK to me are a bit concerning for a few dimensions. If, for example, we were to say, all right, we've increased the quality from 20 to 25, that's very small increment on innovation. We know for a fact that the UK has very good value-based pricing, which means whatever may be the optical, over a quality, there are discounts. The US is strong, the UK wants to negotiate. While it is helpful, the prices may never be the same. Now that potentially creates an issue. Now, the UK is not part of the European Union. The JCA is strong. MFN is looking at anybody and everybody, and it will, because we are obliged to inform them if we should what we want to do. So this is the beginning for, I think, a little bit more of complexity. Just because you shook a hand doesn't mean everything is clear. Because you've now brought in NICE into your, obviously spoken earlier, NICE has grown broader than the UK. I'm actually happy that the JCA may also be able to potentially try to bring some equilibrium. But believe me, the colossal effect on MFN is far beyond UK and JCA. And the question is, if you look at it, the price points of what we have currently in UK versus what we already have in the US is far different. So yes, it's a complex question. I don't have a crystal ball answer, but it does, to your earlier point, and we think of launch sequencing, this is where the biggest impact will be.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to answer a few questions that we are getting, and I'm not going to apologize to those that ask questions. I will answer. We will try to answer all of them. By the way, we do have what we call after party, but not every speaker could stay. And I do know that Neil has an appointment, so I'm going to go to Neil first. Neil, considering the complexity of indirect treatment comparisons and kind of the framework that you described, is there a way to do kind of an early model or an early simulation to understand where the product would fit in and what analysis we would need? Is there something that could be done for pharma that way?
Yes, I think we can generally conduct these analyses early in anticipation of what data we might get. We can even try and simulate missing data. There's also, it's important to look early because we may need to try and use observational kind of real world evidence to link up, fill in some of the gaps. So not only can we do it, I think in many cases or some cases, it's critical to do it because
And,
it gives us the time to find additional evidence that we might need that might come from outside the trials.
And is this early as soon as we have, let's pretend I'm a pharma company A, as soon as I have my product data, do I need to have my IPD to conduct these types of simulations? Or is there's anything I could do just when I am considering my target product profile and I don't have yet my phase 3 pivotal data?
Well, we may want to start these activities while we're commissioning and designing our trials, because again, it may help us decide who should go into our trials, what endpoints we should measure, and what comparators we should use. So simulating, and that can be just mapping out the data and thinking what the analysis might be like, doing that very early can be really helpful. Oftentimes, we look at trials and think, why was it designed like that? It's going to be very difficult for us to come up with reliable estimates of comparative effectiveness. We can, of course, simulate data based on the target product profile, based on elicitation, and so on and so forth, to get some idea of what the results might look like. Whether we need to do the simulation or whether just simply looking and mapping the evidence and understanding the characteristics of evidence that we do have, that may in many cases be sufficient. Sometimes it can be useful to actually try and simulate the IPD and do something more sophisticated. And again, those simulations can help inform trial design.
Thank you. Then I have a question for Andy. Thinking about the complexity of the patient's journey, could you comment on the importance or not, and how do we do this, the inputs from not only the clinical study, but the physicians, the patients, and the caregivers? How could these be reflected in the model? And with various scenarios, and different countries are considering them and different countries not.
Thanks, Anna. I saw this question. It's a very good question. Something that we are thinking about more methodologically about how do we routinely bring more patient input into our model design. It's in terms of I think there are important aspects of the patient journey that we could incorporate, but I don't think that we are going to get there just by having, a token patient advocate on a panel or an advisory board, for example. I think we have to, if we really want to have better patient input into our decision makings, we have to take patient research seriously. So that means not just having them as advisors, but actually conducting the sorts of qualitative research that we can then synthesize and bring to bear in our economic models. So all of those things that are listed, caregivers, young patients, I think we can incorporate, but we need the real research, the patient evidence to be generated that we can then use to incorporate. At the moment, that's pretty sparse.
Thank you. Question to Stefan. Currently, the inputs we've discussed were all based on the evidence that's available, publicly available evidence. So the guidelines, when we assess individual countries, we're thinking of the guidelines and what's reimbursed, what's right. But is there a way for us to capture off-label use? And how do we, when we think about JCA, also incorporate that?
A very good question, and it just reminded me on one of our very first JCA experiences we had. I think we also did, it was a super easy kind of indication, I would have said at the very beginning. So we defined as well the different kind of PICOs with the company and different experts and whatsoever. And I think we came up with probably, I don't know, 14 or 15 different kind of PICOs. We should have covered, I think, the 27 countries. So we submitted that. JCA office came back, and it was not only 14, they basically came up with 19 or 20 of those. So 2 or 3 of those really hard to understand where they were coming from. I think that was rather a bit like exactly what you said, kind of standard of care, but more or less off-label. It was oncology, rare kind of indication, of course, oncology, rare kind of indication. So that basically is what brought us, again, a bit back to the kind of points of how should we consider that. And I think it's probably as well a bit what we had just heard as well around, let's say, how to integrate, let's say, patient journey and the like into the whole kind of process, right? Because guideline is just the official one. In some guidelines, you can also find some kind of off-label information, maybe call it like that, right? With the different kind of evidence gradings and all the kind of like. So maybe we need as well to take that a bit more seriously, at least in the early planning, which would still bring me back which kind of analysis we want and need to run. Anyhow, we should have everything basically mapped out, because only then we can really, let's say, come up with the kind of final and well-informed decision-making and hence strategy. But I think it's not only the kind of published information, as you just said. I think we also need to understand what is happening, let's say, within the, maybe call it prescriber/patient markets, right? So what is really and actually being done? And that's as well, going back to what I said a bit earlier, it's not only that we need to speak maybe with a high level physicians at the academic institutions, which are important because of the driver for innovation. However, if we're speaking about standard of care, that's probably beyond that. And that's as well where we need to understand as well what is happening across a country out of those 27 in the European Union, which brings me again back to which ones are, let's say, strategically maybe a bit more important, or could be clustered as well, different kind of countries. And I think this is probably as well where all of us would need to think a bit about much broader as well, taking the publicly available information plus some further research with physician, but also with patient, maybe as well into further strategic considerations.
Thank you. I want to use the last 5 minutes because I do understand that not only some speakers may be leaving, but our attendees also have limited time. So I want to answer a bunch of questions that are all around the Oncoscope offering as the living literature review. Before I do, I would like to thank Neil because I know he has to run. Okay, and I do want to say I'm not going to go on forever. Just to clarify, the Oncoscope Living Evidence is a systematic literature review. It is conducted by human beings. There is no search in real time that when you are searching, what you're doing is filtering and not searching. There is no extraction that is happening at your fingertips. Everything has been pre-searched and pre-extracted. It's just being done daily. Actual team of human beings look like me, and they go every morning, and there's a lead on each cancer, and they go in, they click a button. Yes, the processes are automated. The key to that is automation, not even AI. In many cases, we're all excited about AI, so it's cool to say, oh, AI does this, AI. But there are a lot of things that existed for years and years and years. With automation, there's a lot of things you could automate, and this filtering and organizing the data and bringing the reference and automated reporting in all of that have no AI included. This is all automation. So for your purposes, yes, it is a systematic literature review conducted using PubMed as the base case database, as well as all relevant congresses, which vary depending on indication. So, for example, for breast cancer, it's not only ASCO and ESMO breast, but it is also going to be a San Antonio breast cancer. For, hematology, obviously EHA and ASH are extremely important. In multiple myeloma, there's International Myeloma Society conference. So it depends on the cancer by cancer. All of the conferences are reviewed, and everything is pre-extracted. 32 variables are currently extracted. Now there is an option that is offered to extend to other databases, because we do understand that JCA does require, and as traditional SLRs require you to search Embase and Cochrane, and we do offer that, but it is extra. It is not in the base case because these are not publicly available. These require a subscription. I was asked whether the table is automatically extracted. Yes, the tables are generated at your fingertips. You decide which columns you want, which means which variables. Do you want just, for example, OS table? And what would you like in that? You want N, maybe you want to know the definition of OS, maybe you want to have the median OS, maybe you also want to have a landmark OS. So you decide what it is and you create your table that you want on demand in the matter of seconds, and then click a button and download that to Excel. And as much as you did that, you can then click another button and your Word report is generated using the NICE template. The Word report is generated, and it's generated for the original PICO, which means the whole very, very wide cancer. But then whatever you narrowed it down, if you selected the subpopulation, only relapsed refractory multiple myeloma, then you said, oh, I want them to be triple exposed and I want them to be refractory to IMID. Those are the criteria that are going to be reflected. And then it's going to say these are your additional Prisma. Yes, there's going to be a custom Prisma generated on demand. And there's no magic. And there is, by the way, no AI in that at all. It is just programming. So I hope I answered most of the question. There was a question about experience in rare diseases. And I do want to say that Oncoscope, as you can see in the name of Onco, only deals with oncology. We plan to launch one cancer a month in the next year. We do take orders for cancers, and then we could then do reprioritization of which cancer we launch next. But rare diseases are covered as long as they're oncology indications. And we did work with several rare diseases. We haven't launched it yet, but in our validation, in our work, we were very, very closely worked with ASCO guideline committee, and they had the same question. Well, could you do a rare disease SLR because it's difficult? We did do testing and validation in the rare disease. I do not know if I have steps of being automated. Okay, could you elaborate? Okay, the search of PubMed is automated. The protocol is written by humans, and then that protocol with the push of a button runs every day. That's automated steps. Everything is then downloaded into the database. That's automation. And then the AI program that has been trained. We have publications. Happy to write to me. I will send you the publication validation. AI program reviews using 4 PICO criteria. Each PICO is reviewed independently, which means if you need to go back to change a certain PICO, we recently had that in prostate cancer. It took us about a couple of hours, and then a new intervention option was included. For example, watch and wait, or active surveillance, as we call it. We before rejected studies that only included active surveillance, and then we talked to a physician group and they believed it should be included. It took us 2 hours to rerun the database. Then all the extraction is automated. 32 variables are extracted using AI. This has been validated on over 60,000 records at this point and being redone every day that we are reviewing more. But a human team QCs 100% of review and extraction. There are no other steps that utilize AI at that point. There is an automation with regards to reordering publications and finding, grouping publications by study. So there's a search piece that is automated, and we have an algorithm, whether it is the same NCT number, trial number, or whatever, what so far. And then there is automation, quite a bit of automation in generating the outputs. But that's just a simple programming. Some of you may have known me when I had Purple Squirrel Economics and we had a product live SLR. That front end part was already there. This one is, 100 times better and more sophisticated because, technology moved ahead. Okay, we are having some speakers. So last call for questions to Andy, Arup, and Stefan, if you have any. I'm trying to look for questions. I think we have answered. If you have any additional questions, right, afterwards, please reach out to me or any of the speakers. If you have a question to a speaker, you don't know a speaker, email, reach out to me. I'll connect you to the speaker. Obviously, I am connected to all of them. And I think we've actually answered all of the questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you all. Good discussion.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
So, Anna, should we start the after party?
Yeah, we can start the after party if we have any questions.
I'm afraid I can't stay,
Yes.
Anna, because I could only stay
Right.
for the hour.
No,
So
I understand.
I've got to head out now. But yeah,
Totally.
well,
I
thanks.
understand.
Thanks, and
Thank you.
speak to you soon.
Thank you.
Bye for
Bye-bye.
now.
Jose, I do believe though we answered all of the questions and I don't see any more coming.
What I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on the ability for people to raise their hands and we can bring people on microphone if they want to speak. Let's see. But let's see. Is there anybody who would like to speak? Put a message in the chat, or I'm going to give you the ability to raise your hands. Sorry, I turned it off during the event. There. You can raise your hand or put a message in the chat if you want to speak to Anna, and I will give you a live microphone. And I'm going to I'm actually going to turn on people's mic, but I think we might be done.
I think we might be done because I have reviewed the questions and I did answer. Okay.
What I'm doing is I'm allowing people to speak. They're actually, the microphones are muted. I think you did a great job.
Thank you.
And we may have had, well, I mean, we may have had all the questions answered actually, but
Yes.
it's going to take me a minute, Anna, to turn on everyone because I have to do it one at a time. I think we had about 120 people sign in during the event.
Right. That's
Very
great.
good.
I know you permitted them all talking, but I don't think we have any questions.
And okay.
Stefan is still here.
Yeah, Lutz just messaged me. He is part of my team that you were still online, so I didn't want to miss anything. So I just came back.
Right. So, but I don't see any other questions coming. So because of that,
We could say goodbye.
yes, I think the recording will be available. I will send a link on YouTube to recording of the complete webinar to everyone who registered, whether they attended or not, because some people, I've been receiving quite a few emails asking me, that they can't attend last minute and they wanted the recording. So we'll get that. Thank you. Thank you,
Thank you
everybody.
very much,
Thank
everybody.
you. Bye.
Take care. Bye.